The Daily Brew Cafe, a cozy little nook in the heart of the city, glowed with soft amber lighting from hanging lamps, filtering through rows of old bookshelves. The scent of freshly roasted coffee mingled with the aroma of baked goods, creating a space that felt both intimate and lively. Small wooden tables were neatly arranged, each adorned with a tiny lavender vase. Clementine Harper stepped into the cafe, her white canvas sneakers slightly smudged with flour from her morning shift. Her gray Sweet Haven Bakery t-shirt was speckled with smudges of butter and dough, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing flour-dusted arms. Her chestnut brown hair was messily tied up in a bun, with a few unruly strands clinging to her forehead. In her hands, she held a still-warm croissant wrapped hurriedly in parchment paper, her trophy from the oven, grabbed on the way out. She glanced at her watch. 5 minutes late. Great. A perfect start to a date she didn't even want to go to, she thought, lips curling into a resigned frown. Clementine wasn't the blind date type. In fact, she didn't have time for romance. Between baking pastries, writing her recipe blog under the pseudonym Miss Ovenmitt, and taking care of her cat, Butter, her life already felt full. But Lily Hart, her best friend since high school, had begged her to fill in for a last-minute emergency date. "I got stuck at a photo shoot, Clem. Please just sit there for 10 minutes, say a few things, and bounce." Lily had pleaded over the phone, voice syrupy sweet. And since Clementine wasn't great at saying no, here she was, feeling completely out of place in the most undate-like outfit possible. She scanned the cafe, looking for the target based on Lily's description. A man around 30, wearing a gray suit, neat hair, looked like he stepped out of Forbes magazine. Easy enough. The cafe wasn't crowded, and near the window sat a man with perfect posture, flipping through a financial newspaper. Nathaniel Wolfe. Clementine took a deep breath, smoothed her shirt, not that it helped, and walked over. Nathaniel Wolfe didn't like wasting time. As the CEO of Wolfe Capital, he was used to tight schedules, high-stakes meetings, and million-dollar decisions. This date arranged by his longtime mentor, Gideon Vale, was a social obligation he had reluctantly agreed to. "You need to lighten up, Nathaniel. Meeting a nice girl might do you some good," Vale had said with a wink. Nathaniel's plan was to wrap this up in 5 minutes, politely decline, and get back to his waiting spreadsheets. But when Clementine walked up to the table, Nathaniel nearly dropped his newspaper. He had pictured someone polished, maybe a lawyer or a marketing executive, with styled curls and a perfect, rehearsed smile. Instead, standing before him was a girl in a flour-stained t-shirt, windblown hair, and cradling a croissant like it was a rare gem. She looked like she had run straight from the kitchen. Nathaniel frowned slightly, yet his eyes, despite his logic, were drawn to her flour-covered hands, clutching the pastry like it might float away. "Hi, are you Nathaniel, right?" Clementine spoke, her voice a little shaky but trying to sound casual. She placed the croissant on the table like it was an obstacle to get rid of. "I'm Clementine. Well, I'm here in place of Lily. She had something come up." Nathaniel blinked, trying to process. A stand-in? This was new. "In place of her?" he repeated, voice low and even, like he was questioning an employee. "She was too busy to come herself?" Clementine gave an awkward smile and took the seat across from him, fingers absent-mindedly picking at the parchment paper. Yeah, photo shoot. Lily's a freelance model. She said I just had to sit here, chat a little, and then done." She shrugged, brown eyes gleaming with a touch of mischief. "I don't usually do blind dates, so I might be a little awkward. Hope you don't mind." Nathaniel watched her, trying to keep a neutral expression, though the corner of his mouth twitched. Awkward was a mild way to describe the situation. The girl in front of him was unlike anyone he'd ever met at corporate galas or charity events. She spoke like she was chatting with an old friend, completely unguarded and refreshingly unfiltered. And oddly enough, he found that interesting. Realizing she was rambling, Clementine searched for something to fill the silence. "Do you like coffee? This place makes a great latte. Or are you more of a tea person?" "I like both, but today I just baked a fresh batch of croissants." She gestured at the pastry. "It's still warm. Want to try it?" Nathaniel looked at the croissant, then at her. "You brought a pastry here? His tone held surprise, not judgment. Yeah, I just finished my shift. Didn't have time to change, Clementine replied, scratching the back of her neck. I'm a pastry chef. This one's a new recipe, bit of honey and orange zest. Sounds weird, but it's good. He raised an eyebrow, not answering right away. Part of him wanted to say no, he didn't eat sweets, and this was supposed to be a 5-minute date. But there was something about her expectant gaze, her open enthusiasm about a simple croissant, that made him hesitate. You made it yourself? He asked, voice softening slightly. I did. I even have a baking blog. Not to brag, but I'm kind of a big deal. Anonymously. My nickname's Miss Oven Mitt. She laughed, dimples showing. I know, it's silly. Nathaniel didn't laugh, but his eyes lit up, as if holding back a reaction. Miss Oven Mitt, he repeated in a low voice. You're definitely one of a kind. Clementine shrugged, unsure if he was being sincere or sarcastic. Thanks, I guess. So what do you do? Lily said something important? Finance, right? Investments, Nathaniel replied briefly, setting the newspaper aside. I run an investment firm. He paused, waiting for her to probe. Most people did, curious about his wealth or status. But Clementine just nodded, like he'd said he worked in a regular office job. Sounds busy, she said, then gestured to the croissant. Anyway, try it. If it's bad, be honest, I can take it. Nathaniel looked at the pastry, then at her again. There was something in her sincerity, completely unpolished and unpretentious, that felt foreign to him, a man used to a world of calculation and precision. He picked up the croissant and took a small bite. The buttery texture melted on his tongue, blending with a hint of honey and delicate citrus. Delicious. Genuinely delicious. He tried to maintain a straight face, but his eyes lit up briefly, as if surprised by the revelation. Well? Clementine asked, tilting her head, eyes sparkling, clearly eager for feedback. Nathaniel set the pastry down, wiped his hands with a napkin. Not bad, he said evenly, though his gaze betrayed a flicker of delight. Clementine smiled, as if she noticed it too, though she said nothing. The date lasted far longer than either of them expected. Clementine went on about her baking, the time she burned a whole batch of macarons, her cat Butter, who rejected most of her food. Nathaniel, though usually quiet, found himself listening more than he intended. He didn't understand why he was still sitting there when he should have left ages ago. Maybe it was the way she laughed, or how she flailed her hands and sent flour flakes onto the table, or how she casually called him gray suit guy without a hint of hesitation. Eventually, half an hour had passed. Clementine checked her watch and gasped. Oh no, I have to go. Butter's probably starving. She stood up, leaving the croissant on the table. Thanks for not getting mad that I came instead of Lily, she said, grinning, dimples showing. Hope you're not too disappointed. Nathaniel gave a small nod, eyes still on her. Not disappointed, he said, his voice low but more genuine than he meant it to be. She waved and walked out of the cafe, her figure disappearing around the corner. Nathaniel Wolfe sat at the table in the Daily Brew, his finger tapping lightly on the edge of the financial newspaper, his gaze unconsciously following Clementine Harper as she left. The croissant she'd left behind, now only half remaining after his test bite, sat tilted on the plate, as if daring his perfect sense of control. He had meant to end this date in 5 minutes. A polite refusal, a brief handshake, then back to the world of numbers and strategy. But 5 minutes had stretched longer than planned, and he was still sitting there, feeling as if a strange wind had just blown through. Clementine. Her name echoed in his head, along with the image of flour-dusted hands, dimpled smiles, and a non-stop voice chatting about pastries, cats, and a blog called Miss Oven Mitt. She had admitted she was filling in for a friend, some Lily, with a frankness so naive it was disarming. No one in Nathaniel's world, from business partners to employees, ever spoke to him without a hint of calculation. But she was different. She recounted burning a batch of macarons as if it were a victory, giggled as she called him gray suit guy, and offered him a pastry with child-bright eyes. And he, for some reason, had taken a bite. Butter melted on his tongue lightly, sweet, fragrant, with a delicate hint of orange zest. He'd said not bad, but the truth was it tasted better than any dessert he'd tried in five-star restaurants. Nathaniel didn't like sweets. He didn't like things that disrupted the neat order of his life. And yet here he was, his hand unconsciously picking up the scrap of parchment paper that had wrapped the croissant, folding it and slipping it into his suit pocket as if it were a keepsake worth saving. He stood, paid for the untouched espresso, and left the cafe. As he stepped onto the street, the cool August air brushed his skin, and Nathaniel realized the corner of his mouth had lifted. A smile, not the social kind he used in meetings, but something natural and rare enough to startle even him. Who was that girl anyway, he wondered. But no answer came. Only the scent of butter and honey lingered somewhere in his memory. Back at Wolf Capital, Nathaniel walked into his familiar space, where everything was arranged with precision. Today, though, the expansive room felt a little empty. He sat in the leather chair, opened his laptop to review financial reports, but his eyes drifted toward the window. The image of Clementine with messy hair and a flower-streaked tee kept circling in his mind. He shook his head, trying to chase it away, but failed. A soft knock sounded. Gideon Vale, Nathaniel's longtime advisor, and a man who was almost a second father to him, stepped inside. In his 60s, Vale had a head of silver hair, keen eyes, and a smile that always carried a trace of wryness. He wore a light brown suit, a clear contrast to Nathaniel's rigid style, as if to remind him that life wasn't only about work. "How was the date, son?" Vale asked, taking the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Did the girl make you forget Excel for a few minutes?" Nathaniel frowned, though the corner of his mouth twitched. "Nothing noteworthy," he said evenly. "She wasn't even the person I was supposed to meet. She came in place of her friend." Vale raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "In place of her? Interesting. Tell me." Nathaniel hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing personal matters, not even with Vale, but something in the older man's curious look made the words slip out. "She's a pastry chef. Name's Clementine. She showed up in a flower-stained uniform, hugging a croissant, and talked like we'd known each other forever. She's strange." "Strange in a good way or a bad way?" Vale asked, his smile widening. Nathaniel shrugged, trying to sound indifferent. "She brought a pastry to the date and made me try it. Said something like, 'baked with kindness.'" "Who says that?" He stopped, realizing he'd already said more than he intended. "Anyway, it's over. I don't plan to see her again." Vale chuckled, his warm laugh filling the quiet office. "You ate that pastry, didn't you?" Nathaniel stiffened. His hand moved to his breast pocket where the parchment scrap still rested. "No," he said unconvincingly. "Oh, Nathaniel," Vale said, standing to give his shoulder a light pat. "You can fool a board of directors, but not me. The girl made you smile, I can see it in your eyes. Don't be so quick to shut that door." Nathaniel didn't answer, only watched Vale leave. When the door clicked shut, he took out the parchment, opened it, and caught a faint buttery scent. He folded it again, tucked it into a desk drawer, and told himself he'd throw it out later. But he knew he wouldn't. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Clementine flopped onto the sofa, and Butter the cat promptly jumped up to curl on her belly. She stared at the ceiling, thinking back on the date. Nathaniel Wolf, with his immaculate gray suit and eyes that seemed to see through everything, wasn't exactly the kind of person she'd expected to meet. He was taciturn, serious, and probably would never read her blog. But there was a moment when he bit into the croissant and his eyes lit up when she thought she saw a different Nathaniel. Not a CEO, just an ordinary man who might laugh if she tried hard enough. She didn't know that. Across town, Nathaniel was thinking about her too, with a scrap of parchment in his drawer, and a strange feeling quietly working its way into his heart. A week had passed since the strange date at the Daily Brew, and Nathaniel Wolf had really tried to forget the girl with messy hair and the buttery croissant. But the scrap of parchment paper still sat in his desk drawer, never thrown away, like a lingering reminder of a moment he couldn't explain. He had returned to his usual routine, endless meetings, thick financial reports, and quiet evenings in his 12th floor apartment where everything was so neat it bordered on lifeless. Still, every now and then, With a sip of black coffee, he found himself thinking of the buttery taste and the dimpled smile of Clementine Harper. Meanwhile, completely unaware that she'd left a mark on the mind of a CEO, Clementine was busy with a big change. Thanks to Lily's referral, she had just moved into an apartment at Silver Heights with a surprisingly discounted rent, a rare opportunity she couldn't pass up. Apartment 1103, smaller than most in the building, but flooded with sunlight and perfect for her, Butter the cat, and the little kitchen she had transformed into her personal baking lab. She spent the week unpacking, writing a new blog post about her passion fruit tart recipe, and giggling every time she remembered Gray Suit Guy and the way his eyes lit up when he tasted her croissant. She didn't expect to see him again, but the memory of that date still made her smile, like a funny story to tell friends. On Saturday night, as the clock neared 11:45 p.m., Clementine stood in the kitchen, wearing an oversized flour-dusted t-shirt, holding a hand mixer. She was testing a new custard cream recipe for cream puffs, determined to perfect it before posting to Miss Ovenmitt. The steady hum of the mixer blended with soft jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. Butter the cat, curled up on the sofa, occasionally shot her a disgruntled look, as if complaining about the noise. What Clementine didn't realize was that in a building known for its top-tier soundproofing, the buzz of her mixer was leaking up through the ceiling, straight into the apartment on the 12th floor. Nathaniel, freshly returned from a company party, was trying to unwind in his living room with a glass of whiskey and a book on investment strategy. He ditched the suit jacket and rolled up his white shirt sleeves, but his mind remained tense as ever. The faint whir from downstairs began. Quiet at first, but enough to make him frown. At first, he tried to ignore it, assuming it was someone's washing machine. But after 10 minutes, when the noise kept going, he put down the book, stood up, and sighed. Who on earth made that kind of racket at this hour? Barefoot, he took the elevator down and stopped in front of apartment 1103. The small nameplate outside read C. Harper. Nathaniel knocked firmly, but not aggressively loud enough to be heard over the mixer inside. The buzzing stopped. Footsteps shuffled behind the door, followed by a voice. Who is it? Do you know what time it is? Nathaniel responded, his voice low but tinged with irritation. He didn't mean to be harsh, but he needed sleep, and the noise wasn't helping. The door opened and Nathaniel froze. Standing in front of him was Clementine Harper, her hair even messier than last time, a smudge of custard cream on her cheek, and holding a whisk like a weapon. She wore an oversized t-shirt and shorts, her bare legs dusted with flour. Behind her, the apartment was bathed in warm light and the rich scent of butter and vanilla, so comforting that Nathaniel momentarily forgot why he was there. Gray Suit Guy, Clementine blurted, eyes wide, then immediately covered her mouth like she'd said something inappropriate. I mean, Nathaniel, right? What are you doing here? Nathaniel blinked, trying to make sense of the situation. I live upstairs, he said slowly. Your mixer, it's a little loud. Clementine's face flushed pink. She set the whisk down on the table. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was that loud. I was making custard for cream puffs, and she stopped herself, realizing she was rambling. Would you like to come in? I can offer you a pastry as an apology. Nathaniel frowned, ready to decline. He wasn't used to accepting invitations from strangers, especially not at midnight, and especially not from a girl who looked like she'd rolled in flour. But Clementine's smile, bright, sincere, slightly awkward, made him hesitate. That's not necessary, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Come on, just one, Clementine insisted, opening the door wider. If you don't eat something, I'll feel guilty all night. Butter will judge me too. She gestured toward the cat yawning lazily on the sofa, as if it were an official witness. Nathaniel sighed but stepped inside, intending only to stand at the door. Clementine's apartment was a complete contrast to his own minimalist home. Cookbooks piled on the table, spice jars scattered across the counter, and a small whiteboard scribbled with handwritten recipes. The smell of pastries and vanilla filled the air, making his shoulders relax without him realizing it. Clementine bustled about, grabbing a freshly baked cream puff from the tray, placing it on a plate, and offering it to him. Here, just made it. Still warm. Nathaniel looked at the pastry golden crust, custard oozing slightly as she gently sliced it open. He hadn't planned to eat it, but her expectant expression, so much like when she'd offered the croissant, made it impossible to refuse. "I don't eat sweets," he said, even as he took the plate. "Just one bite," Clementine urged, grinning. "If you hate it, I'll never make noise again. Promise." Nathaniel took a small bite, ready to say something neutral. But the smooth custard, lightly sweet, blended perfectly with the crisp shell, and he paused. He said nothing, just nodded slightly, and Clementine beamed, like she'd just won a prize. Before handing back the plate, Nathaniel casually grabbed one more puff, then left without another word. Sunday morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of Nathaniel Wolf's 12th floor apartment, casting soft shadows on the dark wood dining table where he was reading the financial section. After being woken up the night before by Clementine Harper's stand mixer, Nathaniel had told himself he would keep his distance from the strange girl downstairs, but the cream puff she'd handed him, now long gone, had made that promise difficult to keep. He didn't like sweets, and yet the smooth custard and crisp shell had vanished from the plate without a second thought. And though he refused to admit it aloud, he still remembered the bashful smile she gave him when offering that pastry. Down on the 11th floor, Clementine woke up with a twinge of guilt. That mixer had definitely disturbed gray suit guy, now known to her as Nathaniel, the upstairs neighbor. Determined to apologize properly, she set out to bake a batch of savory scones using a test recipe, cheese and thyme. Butter the cat stretched lazily on the kitchen counter, eyeing the tray of scones with a look of deep suspicion, as if already anticipating disappointment. "Don't judge me," Clementine muttered, giving him a pat on the head before packing a few slightly wonky but fragrant scones into a paper box and heading for the elevator. Nathaniel was sipping his black coffee when a knock sounded at the door. He frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone this early on a weekend. When he opened it, there stood Clementine, in her now signature style, an oversized t-shirt dusted with flour, her hair messily pinned up, and a pastry box in her hands. Her smile, bright yet a little sheepish, made him pause longer than he meant to. "Hi, Nathaniel," Clementine said, her voice a touch nervous. "I brought you some scones to say sorry for the noise last night. I wasn't sure if you like savory stuff, so I made cheese and thyme. Hope they're okay." Nathaniel glanced at the box, then back at her. He meant to say no, he didn't like unexpected visitors, especially ones bearing things that might throw off the rhythm of his day, but her hopeful eyes, combined with the warm, herby aroma wafting from the box, made him reconsider. "You didn't have to do that," he said, but still stepped aside. "Come in." Clementine stepped into the apartment and was instantly hit by how different it was from hers. It looked like something out of an interior design magazine. Sleek, minimalist, with black leather furniture, a glass table, and not a single item out of place. Compared to her own chaotic little home, crammed with cookbooks and spice jars, this place felt like another planet. She set the pastry box on the dining table and lifted the lid, revealing golden scones, uneven in shape but mouth-watering in smell. "They're not much to look at," she admitted, scratching her head. "Experimental recipe, so be honest if they're awful." Nathaniel sat down, picked up a scone, and took a bite. The cheesy flavor mixed nicely with the thyme, though the texture was slightly dry, like she'd overmixed the dough. He frowned slightly, chewing thoughtfully, then said, "Terrible? But strangely, I want more." His voice was low and even, but something about the tone hinted at a playful tease. Clementine burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the quiet apartment. "Seriously? Terrible, but still worth eating? You're a strange one." She sat down across from him without waiting for an invitation and launched into a story about her first scone experiment a few weeks ago, when she'd accidentally used salt instead of sugar. "Butter looked at that tray of disaster like it was garbage," she said, eyes twinkling. "He's the harshest food critic I know." Nathaniel, not usually one to smile, felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Your cat critiques your baking?" he asked, voice tinged with disbelief and curiosity. "Oh, totally. Butter is the pickiest eater. One time I made butter cookies, and he sniffed them once and walked away like, 'You think I'm going to eat this?'" She mimicked the cat's glare, eyes wide, and Nathaniel let out an unexpected laugh, a short, deep sound that caught them both off guard. He quickly stopped, as though he'd done something out of character. Clementine, sensing his awkwardness, quickly changed the subject. So, what about you? Any hobbies besides reading financial news and wearing gray suits? Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, not used to being asked things so directly. I don't have time for hobbies, he replied, but then, drawn in by her smile, added, but I do run, early mornings when the city's still quiet. Running? Clementine tilted her head, eyes lighting up. I like running too, but the slow kind. The kind where you stop to admire trees or grab a coffee midway. Probably not your style, huh? Definitely not, Nathaniel said, though his lips curved upward slightly. You stop for coffee during a run? Of course, life's short, gotta enjoy it. She laughed again, tossing her hands in the air and sending scone crumbs onto the table. Oh, sorry. Nathaniel shook his head, waving it off. It's fine. They sat there trading light conversation. Clementine shared her love for baking, the latest post on Miss Ovenmit that she'd written at 2 a.m., and how she found joy in baking even when butter was her only audience. Nathaniel, though still reserved, began to open up in small ways. How he liked listening to classical music while working, or that one time he tried to cook and burned an entire pot of soup. I'm not meant to be in the kitchen, he said dryly, though his eyes had warmed. Clementine realized he wasn't as cold as he seemed. Beneath the suit and stern gaze was someone who could smile, could listen, and could eat a bad scone and still reach for another. Nathaniel, meanwhile, found himself strangely at ease. His apartment, usually just a place to sleep, now smelled like time and laughter. When Clementine stood to leave, she left the box of scones on the table. Keep them, she said with a bright grin. If you hate them, just blame Butter. He's the real mastermind. Nathaniel nodded, walking her to the door. Thanks, he said, and this time, his voice held a sincerity that surprised even him. As the door closed behind her, he looked at the box, picked up another scone, and took a bite. Still dry, but he smiled. Downstairs, Clementine stepped back into her kitchen, pet Butter on the head, and thought of Nathaniel's rare smile. This neighbor is kind of interesting, she murmured, heart beating a little faster. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Clementine Harper never imagined that a short blog post written hastily at 1 a.m. could cause such a mess. Her latest post on Miss Ovenmit recounted her attempt at baking cheese scones to apologize to her neighbor, along with a quick photo, the back of a man in a white shirt, seated at a table with a misshapen scone in front of him. Her caption, teasing in tone, read, "When you bring apology scones to your neighbor, but this VIP eats like he's chewing lemons. Next time, more butter." She hadn't mentioned his name or shown his face and figured only her usual few dozen loyal readers would even see it. But by Monday morning when she woke up, her phone was flooded with notifications. The blog had gone viral. On foodie forums and social media, people were buzzing about the mysterious VIP in the photo. Someone recognized the luxurious apartment in the background. Someone else zoomed in on a pen lying on the table and spotted a tiny Wolf Capital logo. Within hours, the rumor spread. Miss Ovenmit is dating Nathaniel Wolf, CEO of Wolf Capital. Some readers even dug through her old posts, analyzing every word for clues. Clementine nearly spat out her coffee while reading the comments. Dating? With gray suit guy? Oh my God, she groaned, slapping her forehead. Butter, sprawled next to her on the couch, gave her a look that clearly said, "You brought this on yourself." Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor of Wolf Capital, Nathaniel Wolf was facing an unwanted storm. His assistant, looking pale, handed him a printed article titled, "The Cold CEO and His Sweet Secret, Dating the Pastry Blogger?" Nathaniel scanned the headline and frowned. The photo, though blurry, was unmistakably him, and the caption, "Eats like he's chewing lemons," made him huff, but also caused the corner of his mouth to twitch slightly. He wasn't angry. In fact, oddly enough, he found it amusing. Gideon Vale, his longtime advisor, walked in wearing a mischievous grin. "You're famous now, Nathaniel," he said. setting a cup of coffee on the desk. That pastry girl really knows how to stir things up. Nothing worth stirring, Nathaniel replied evenly, eyes still fixed on the article. Just a misunderstanding. I'll take care of it. Gently, Vale warned with a wink. She didn't do it on purpose. And you don't seem all that bothered. Nathaniel didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for his assistant to contact Clementine. He needed to see her not just to squash the rumors, but because, though he'd never admit it, he was curious to hear her explanation, and maybe see that familiar, sheepish smile again. That afternoon, Clementine stood nervously in front of the Wolf Capitol Tower, clutching a box of butter cookies like a peace offering. Wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled into a ponytail, she had tried to look a little more put together than usual, but hadn't noticed the small streak of flour still clinging to her cheek. The elevator whooshed her up to the 42nd floor, and when she stepped into Nathaniel's office, it felt like she'd walked straight into a movie set. The room was massive, lined with glass windows overlooking the city skyline, and Nathaniel, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, sat behind a sleek desk like some kind of modern-day king. But his eyes, when they landed on her, held something unexpectedly playful. "Miss Harper," Nathaniel said, voice low as he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." Clementine sat down, placing the cookie box on the desk, hands fidgeting. I'm really sorry about the blog post," she began, voice shaky. "I didn't think it would blow up like that. I didn't name you, I swear. Just a blurry back photo. And I didn't call you a VIP, people made that up." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, picking up a printed copy of the blog. "Eats like he's chewing lemons," he read aloud, a trace of amusement in his voice. "That's how you describe me?" Clementine blushed and covered her mouth. No, I just meant you were so serious it looked like you hated the scone, but you did eat the whole thing, didn't you?" She tilted her head, eyes wide, as if that fact alone could clear her name. Nathaniel huffed, but the corner of his lips curved upward. "You took my photo without permission," he said, though his tone wasn't scolding. "And now the whole city thinks I'm dating Miss Oven Mitt." Clementine groaned, hiding her face in her hands. "Oh God, I knew that name was silly. I'll delete the post, I swear. And this," she pushed the cookie box toward him, "is an apology. No experiments this time. Real butter cookies. I promise they're good." Nathaniel glanced at the box, then back at her. He hadn't intended to smile, but her flustered panic, the way she gestured wildly and accidentally knocked a crumb onto the desk, made him do it anyway. "You apologize with pastries a lot," he said, his voice softer now. "Last time it was cream puffs. Now cookies? Well, pastry is kind of my love language," Clementine said with a sheepish grin. "If you don't like cookies, I could make soup, pasta. Wait, what do you like?" Nathaniel shook his head and opened the box, pulling out a cookie. He took a bite, rich, buttery, and just sweet enough, and nodded. "Not bad," he said. But his eyes, gleaming like they did when he first tasted her croissant, told a different story. "See, told you," Clementine said proudly. "So, what do you want me to do about the rumor? I can write a correction post. Something like, 'Not dating, just neighbors.'" Nathaniel sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "No need," he said. "My PR team will handle it. But next time, Miss Harper, no sneaky photos." Clementine nodded quickly, then paused, biting her lip. "You're really not mad?" she asked. "Because I saw you smile." Nathaniel stiffened, like a man caught in the act. "I didn't smile," he replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Clementine beamed, dimples popping, and he knew there was no point pretending anymore. Meanwhile, back at Sweet Haven, the pastry shop's assistant, Tommy, accidentally poured fuel on the fire. After reading Clementine's viral post, he casually told his coworkers about that tall guy in a suit who had once picked up the wrong order at the shop. The story made its way to a regular customer, then online, where someone tweeted, "Rumor has it CEO Wolf visits Sweet Haven often. Is he really dating Miss Oven Mitt?" When Tommy saw the chaos he'd sparked, he just shrugged and said, "How was I supposed to know the guy was that famous?" Back in the office, Nathaniel walked Clementine to the elevator, his eyes following her as she stepped in. "Miss Harper," he called just before the doors closed. "The cookies were better than the scones." Clementine turned with a bright smile. "Thanks, Mr. Wolf. Next time I'll bring croissants. Just be ready with compliments." She waved as the elevator doors slid shut, leaving Nathaniel with one of his rare, real smiles. Back at his desk, the box of cookies still sat there. He picked up another one, took a bite, and thought of the girl who was quietly turning his world upside down. Downstairs, Clementine returned to the bakery, humming as she kneaded dough, still giggling to herself. She wasn't sure if Nathaniel had truly forgiven her or if he just liked the cookies. But either way, she definitely wasn't done baking for him yet. Clementine Harper stood behind the counter at Sweet Haven Bakery, kneading dough for a new batch of bread, though her mind drifted elsewhere, still stuck on the meeting at Nathaniel Wolf's office the day before. She couldn't believe she'd unintentionally caused a citywide dating rumor, and even less that Nathaniel Stoic, ice-cold Nathaniel, had actually smiled after tasting her butter cookies. "Not bad," he had said, but his eyes had sparkled, just like they did when he tasted her croissant. Maybe he didn't hate her after all. Clementine smiled to herself, scattering flour on her shirt, which Tommy, the shop assistant, immediately noticed. "Clem, are you daydreaming again? Thinking about Mr. Tall, Dark, and CEO?" Tommy teased, carrying out a tray of freshly baked lemon tarts. The curly-haired, cheeky assistant had already apologized a dozen times for unintentionally fueling the dating rumors, but that didn't stop him from poking fun at every opportunity. "Shut it, Tommy," Clementine warned, though a smile tugged at her lips. "I'm just thinking about a new recipe." Tommy laughed, about to make another joke when the shop bell rang. Clementine looked up, and her heart skipped a beat. Nathaniel Wolf, in a sharply tailored black suit, stepped into the cozy little bakery, looking utterly out of place among chalkboard signs advertising butter cookies, "Buy 5, get 1 free," in the scent of cinnamon sugar in the air. The customers, mostly neighborhood moms and a few high schoolers, turned to stare and whisper. "Hi, Nathaniel," Clementine said, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to steady her voice. "Are you here to buy something?" Nathaniel nodded, his eyes scanning the pastry display. "All of it," he said, calm and firm. "I'd like to buy everything in the shop today." Clementine blinked, convinced she'd misheard. Tommy nearly dropped his tray. "Everything?" he repeated, voice rising an octave. "You mean the bread, the cakes, the tarts, the cookies, everything, everything?" Nathaniel looked at Tommy, then back at Clementine. "Yes, pack it all up, please." Clementine froze, her brain struggling to process. Sweet Haven wasn't a huge bakery, but she had at least 10 trays of assorted goods out today, enough for a full day of sales. "You're serious?" she asked, fiddling with the edge of her apron. "Why would you buy everything?" Nathaniel gave a small shrug, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Consider it compensation, restoring your shop's reputation," he said, voice calm but with a subtle awkwardness. "That rumor last week couldn't have helped." Clementine blushed, flustered and oddly touched. She hadn't expected Nathaniel Mr. Spreadsheet himself to care about something so personal. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "I already apologized." "I know," Nathaniel replied, his gaze lingering on her longer than necessary. "But I wanted to." Tommy couldn't handle the silence any longer. "Clem, take the win," he grinned. "This sale's worth a whole month's rent." He started boxing up pastries like a man on a mission, muttering, "Big CEO energy, I respect it." Clementine rolled her eyes at him, but turned back to Nathaniel with a sincere smile. "Thank you," she said gently. "Really, but next time, just buy 1 cookie. You scared me half to death." Nathaniel let out a quiet huff, but the corner of his mouth tugged upward, clearly softened by her grin. "I'll consider it," he said, accepting the massive receipt from Tommy, who was valiantly trying to suppress laughter at the eye-popping total. Later that afternoon, back at Wolf Capital, Nathaniel sat behind his desk surrounded by dozens of pastry boxes from Sweet Haven. Around him, staff from secretaries to interns were buzzing with excitement, each holding a tart or cookie, whispering about their boss and the baker girl. Nathaniel, who generally avoided attention like the plague, simply sipped his coffee, occasionally glancing at the box of butter cookies he'd kept aside on his desk just for himself. A ringtone broke the calm. The screen lit up. "Grandma Catherine," he answered, switching to video. And there she was, Catherine Wolfe, elegant as ever with her silver hair swept into a neat bun and a warm, mischievous smile. At 70-something, she still exuded grace, but her twinkling eyes always hinted at mischief. "Nathaniel, working late again?" she said with mild scolding in her voice. "I told you to take a break, not bring the entire bakery back to the office." Nathaniel frowned, but his tone softened. "I didn't bring the entire bakery, just some treats for the staff." Catherine chuckled, but her eyes narrowed as if spotting something in the background. "Who's that behind you?" Nathaniel turned, and his heart gave a little jolt. Clementine had appeared at his office door, unnoticed until now, holding a small tray of extra bread, likely meant to complete the order. Wearing a white tee and a loose apron, her ponytail slightly undone with soft strands falling over her shoulders, she gave an awkward wave as she noticed the screen. "Sorry, just bringing more bread. Didn't mean to interrupt." Catherine smiled, one of those knowing, layered smiles that made Nathaniel's skin crawl with anticipation. "She's lovely," she said warmly. "Are you the one baking for my grandson now?" Clementine blushed, stepping closer to the screen. "Hi, I'm Clementine. I work at Sweet Haven. Nathaniel, he bought everything we baked today, so I thought I'd bring a little extra." "Very generous," Catherine said, shooting Nathaniel a glance full of meaning. "I like her. Nathaniel, you should invite this one to dinner sometime." "Grandma," Nathaniel said, a warning tone creeping in. But Catherine just laughed and ended the call before he could argue. Clementine, standing by the desk, covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. "Your grandmother is adorable," she said as she set the tray down. "What was that look she gave you at the end?" Nathaniel shook his head, trying to stay composed. "She imagines things," he said curtly. But when he looked at Clementine, his eyes softened. "You didn't need to bring more. We already had plenty." "But you bought everything. I had to return the favor somehow," Clementine replied, nudging the tray forward. "These are olive rolls. New recipe. I promise no lemon face this time." Nathaniel picked up a slice, took a bite. The briny olives and crispy crust made his brows lift slightly. "Very good," he said, but his voice was warmer now, enough to make Clementine smile back. As she left the office, Nathaniel watched her go, still holding the roll. And back at Sweet Haven, Clementine returned to her station, kneading dough again, thinking about the glint in Nathaniel's eyes and his grandmother's conspiratorial grin. She didn't know it yet, but a small seed, subtle, uncertain, was quietly beginning to grow in both their hearts. A week had passed since Nathaniel bought out the entire Sweet Haven bakery, an act that had left Clementine both overwhelmed and deeply moved. But what truly surprised her was the email he sent afterward, proposing a charity baking class for underprivileged children with her as the co-instructor and Wolf Capital as the sponsor. "Good for community relations," he had written, but Clementine suspected there was more behind it. Now, seeing him in a navy sweater and slacks no suit, for once she couldn't help but grin. He looked completely out of place amidst the colorful chaos of flour, aprons, and hyper children, but he stood there with arms crossed, watching the room with a steady gaze. "Ready, Mr. Wolfe," Clementine teased, nudging him gently with her elbow. "These kids are tougher than your boardroom." Nathaniel raised a brow, lips curving slightly. "I can handle it," he replied, but his gaze lingered on her, catching the spark of excitement in her eyes. Before he could say more, the event coordinator clapped her hands, signaling the start of the class. Clementine took the lead, her voice warm and animated as she explained how to make simple sugar cookies. The children, ranging from 6 to 10 years old, listened with varying degrees of focus, some already elbow-deep in flour. Nathaniel assisted, distributing measuring spoons and mediating arguments about who got the bigger mixing bowl. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, but Clementine noticed the way his shoulders relaxed each time the kids burst into laughter. Among the group was Emma, a spirited 7-year-old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, who had proudly declared herself the best baker here right from the start. Her apron was already streaked with butter and flour, but her enthusiasm was contagious. "Miss Clem, can I make heart-shaped cookies?" she asked, bouncing in place. "For my mom, she loves hearts, Of course, Emma, Clementine said, kneeling to meet the girl's eye level. We'll do whatever you want. Right, Nathaniel? Caught off guard, Nathaniel gave a small nod. Hearts? Sure. His voice was calm, but Clementine caught a flicker of amusement in his eyes. As the class continued, something unexpected happened. Nathaniel and Clementine slipped into an effortless rhythm. She demonstrated how to knead the dough with her flour-dusted hands, while he explained measurements with the precision of a CEO discussing profit margins. When a boy spilled sugar all over the counter, Clementine simply laughed. Nathaniel, to her surprise, handed the child a towel without a hint of irritation. They balanced each other well, and the children flourished under their shared guidance. Emma, however, was the star of the show. Standing proudly between Clementine and Nathaniel, she directed like a tiny orchestra conductor. Uncle Nate, roll the dough. Miss Clem, cut the hearts, she commanded, hands on hips. Nathaniel obeyed, his large hands awkward but gentle as he wielded the rolling pin. When Emma fumbled with the cookie cutter, he knelt beside her, carefully guiding her hand. Like this, he said softly, voice low and unexpectedly tender. Slow and steady, he coached, helping her create a lopsided heart-shaped cookie. Emma beamed and held it up like a trophy. Perfect! You're amazing, Uncle Nate. You and Miss Clem should totally get married like in those princess cartoons. The room burst into laughter, and Nathaniel turned red, a color Clementine had never seen on him. She bit her lip to hold in a giggle, her eyes twinkling. Emma, you have such creative ideas, she said, ruffling the girl's hair. Nathaniel cleared his throat and stood up quickly. Let's focus on the cookies, he muttered. But Emma wasn't deterred. She whispered loudly to her friend, they look exactly like a prince and princess. Clementine glanced at Nathaniel, half expecting him to scowl, but instead he gave her a rare, soft smile. She smiled back, and for a moment the noise in the room faded, and it felt like just the two of them connected by a child's innocent fantasy. Midway through the session, Gideon Vale arrived, his silver hair glinting under the lights as he leaned against the doorframe, observing quietly. He had been the one who nudged Nathaniel to participate, sensing it would be good for him. Seeing Nathaniel help a boy sprinkle sugar onto cookies, Gideon's eyes narrowed in satisfaction. He caught Clementine's eye and gave her a subtle nod. You're good for him, it seemed to say. The first class ended in joyful chaos, frosting-covered cheeks, rainbow sprinkles everywhere like confetti. Emma proudly presented a tray of heart-shaped cookies, one of which was for Uncle Nate and Miss Clem to share. Nathaniel hesitated, but under Emma's wide-eyed gaze, he broke the cookie in half and offered one piece to Clementine. A team effort, he said, voice low but warm. Clementine accepted the cookie, her fingers brushing his, sending a flutter through her chest. Thanks, teammate, she said with a small smile. The cookie was too sweet and slightly burnt, but she nibbled it anyway, watching as Nathaniel carefully took a bite of his half. Emma clapped, delighted. See? Just like in the movies, she cheered, prompting the rest of the kids to giggle. As the class wrapped up, parents arrived to pick up their children, each walking away with a bag of imperfect cookies and bright memories. Emma hugged Clementine tight, then unexpectedly ran to Nathaniel and wrapped her arms around his leg. You'll come back, right, Uncle Nate? She asked, eyes round and sincere. Nathaniel froze, unaccustomed to such affection, but gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Maybe, he said, voice softer than usual. Clementine watched, her heart warming. Nathaniel, once all hard lines and tailored suits, was letting a 7-year-old chip away at his armor. He met her gaze and for a brief second, looked away, unable to hide the vulnerability in his eyes. After the children left, Clementine and Nathaniel stayed behind to clean up stacking bowls and wiping down tables. Gideon approached with a warm smile. Well done, both of you, he said, patting Nathaniel on the back. You make a good team. He winked at Clementine before leaving, his words lingering in the air. Now alone, Clementine nudged Nathaniel with her elbow. You were amazing with Emma, she said sincerely. I didn't think you could be so gentle with kids. I'm not gentle, Nathaniel replied, but his voice lacked conviction. She was persistent. Just admit it, you liked her, Clementine teased, tossing a towel at him. He caught it, the rare smile returning. Maybe, he said, echoing his earlier words to Emma. You're good with them. They shine around you. Clementine blushed, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Thanks. It's easy when they're as sweet as Emma. And thanks for doing this. It really meant a lot. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze steady. It was worth doing. And though he said no more, Clementine could feel the weight in his words. As they parted ways, Clementine carried home one leftover cookie, thinking of Emma's laughter and Nathaniel's quiet kindness. Later that night, Nathaniel found a heart-shaped cookie in the pocket of his jacket, one Emma had secretly tucked in. He placed it on his desk and smiled softly, realizing that Clementine Harper was slowly becoming an indispensable part of his world. The community center was once again bustling the following Saturday morning, as the charity baking class entered its second week. Tables were covered in flour, sugar, and cookie cutters. Children giggled as they tied their aprons, and the scent of butter wafted through the air. Clementine Harper, in her flour-smudged apron and white t-shirt, was cheerfully instructing a group of kids on how to make peanut butter cookies, but her eyes occasionally drifted to Nathaniel Wolfe, who stood calmly in the corner of the room, sleeves rolled up, helping the children with his usual composed focus. Since last week, when little Emma called them a bride and groom, Clementine had felt a new closeness to Nathaniel. Though he still maintained his reserved demeanor, something had subtly shifted. She tried to keep her attention on the kids, especially Emma, the bright-eyed 7-year-old currently struggling to knead dough with her tiny hands. But the air changed the moment she walked in. A woman, tall, blonde curls perfectly styled, wearing a fitted sapphire blue dress, entered the hall, with heels tapping rhythmically against the tile. Confident, poised, and unmistakably sharp, her presence turned heads. Clementine recognized her instantly. Valerie King, Nathaniel's ex-girlfriend and former business partner. She'd seen Valerie's name while researching Wolf Capital after the dating rumor went viral. Her heart dipped slightly, unsure why. Valerie strolled in, drawing stares from parents and volunteers alike. Her polite smile didn't reach her eyes as they briefly passed over Clementine, glinting with icy disinterest. "Nathaniel," she called, her voice smooth but cutting. "I heard you were hosting this event, so I thought I'd stop by. What a surprise." Nathaniel turned, his expression tightening for just a second before returning to neutral. "Valerie," he said evenly, "didn't expect you here." Clementine, standing beside Emma, focused intently on helping her roll out dough, but she couldn't help hearing Valerie continue, her tone loud enough to carry, "I was just curious. You usually don't spend your time on things like this. A baking class with children?" She laughed softly, her voice carrying a sharp edge that made Clementine's shoulders tense. Nathaniel's brow furrowed as he stepped closer. "It's a company-sponsored community initiative," he said coolly. "Is there something you needed?" Valerie gave a casual shrug, her eyes flicking to Clementine before lingering with veiled judgment. "I just heard the baker girl was getting a lot of attention. Miss Ovenmitt, right? How cute." The word cute was said with such pointed condescension that Clementine gripped the rolling pin tighter. Emma, oblivious to the tension, piped up, "Miss Clem is the best teacher. She makes the yummiest cookies ever." She beamed, but Valerie offered only a hollow smile. "Adorable," she murmured, then turned back to Nathaniel. "But you, Nathaniel, you belong in boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, not in a bakery." Her voice dropped, still audible to Clementine, who was now at the back table fetching more flour. "She's not in your league. You know that. Fun is fine, but this isn't your world." Clementine froze, hand trembling as she poured flour into a mixing bowl. The words struck like daggers, slicing through the quiet insecurity she kept buried beneath cheerful smiles. She was just a baker, living in a tiny apartment, writing an anonymous blog. Nathaniel was a CEO, the kind of man who belonged to glass towers and Forbes covers. She turned away quickly, blinking back tears. She didn't want anyone to see, especially not him. Nathaniel, having clearly heard Valerie's words, clenched his jaw. "That's enough, Valerie," he said, voice low and sharp. "You don't need to comment on her or this project." He glanced toward Clementine. She was hunched over, shoulders slightly shaking. He wanted to go to her, to say something, but Valerie, either unaware or uncaring, continued. "I'm just being honest," she said, her tone feigning concern. You have bigger responsibilities. Don't let a passing hobby distract you. Nathaniel opened his mouth to reply, but it was Emma who broke the tension. Still beside Clementine, she tugged gently at her apron. Miss Clem, are you okay? You look sad. Her voice cut through the room. Clementine quickly forced a smile, patting Emma's head. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just got flour in my eye, she said softly. She glanced at Nathaniel. He was looking at her, but she couldn't read his expression. And in that silence, her heart ached. She assumed his silence meant agreement, and that hurt more than Valerie's words. The rest of the class passed under a heavy cloud. Clementine kept smiling for the kids, helping them bag cookies to take home, but her mind was spinning. Nathaniel continued to assist, quiet, distant. Valerie had left early, but her presence lingered like perfume that refused to fade. As the kids trickled out with their parents, Emma hugged Clementine tightly and whispered, You're the best teacher ever. Don't let that mean lady make you sad. Clementine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, Emma, she whispered, hugging her a little tighter. After cleanup, Nathaniel approached, concern shadowing his features. Miss Harper, he began, voice low, about what happened earlier. It's fine, Clementine cut in, her voice gentle but firm. I understand. Thank you for today. She turned before he could respond, unwilling to let him see the tears threatening to spill. She left the center quickly, heart heavy and aching. Back in her apartment on the 11th floor, Clementine collapsed onto the couch. Butter the cat immediately jumped onto her stomach and curled up like a warm loaf. She stared at the ceiling, Valerie's words looping in her head. Not in your league. She'd always known she and Nathaniel came from different worlds, but hearing it spoken aloud, in that tone from someone like her, made Clementine feel small. She thought about Nathaniel's expression, about his silence, and she couldn't help wondering, was she really just a temporary distraction? Meanwhile, on the 12th floor, Nathaniel stood by his window, looking out at the city skyline. His phone was in his hand, thumb hovering over Clementine's number. He wanted to call her, but he didn't know what to say. Valerie's words had angered him, but it was Clementine's hurt expression that haunted him. He had wanted to protect her, but as always, his silence had only made it worse. On the table beside him sat the heart-shaped cookie Emma had given him the week before. He picked it up gently, staring at it as if it held the answers. And he thought about Clementine's smile, now dimmed by a sadness he had failed to stop. At her desk, Clementine opened her laptop and placed her fingers on the keyboard, hoping to write a new blog post. But they didn't move. She didn't know if she could keep doing the class, or face Nathaniel again, when her sense of self-worth had just been so deeply shaken. Clementine Harper's apartment on the 11th floor was filled with the scent of vanilla, but the atmosphere was heavy. She sat on the sofa with Butter curled up beside her, eyes fixed on the window. Valerie King's words from the charity baking class still echoed in her mind. She's not in your league. Those cutting words, paired with Nathaniel Wolf's silence, had left Clementine feeling small and foolish. She'd stayed up all night baking to chase away the ache, ending up with a half-and-half cookie, half sweet chocolate, half savory cheese. She packed it carefully in a box and slipped in a note. Some things can't be whole if only one person is trying. Then she asked Tommy to deliver it upstairs to the 12th floor. At Sweet Haven, Clementine tried to keep working, but every motion was sluggish. Tommy, with his signature curls and mischievous grin, noticed something was off. You okay, Clem? He asked, holding a tray of tarts. Just tired, Clementine replied, her voice soft, but her eyes were rimmed with red. She didn't want to worry him, but inside she was unraveling. That afternoon, Clementine went to the community center to deliver the news. She was stepping away from the class. She hoped to avoid Nathaniel, but knew she had to talk to the kids, especially Emma. To her relief and slight disappointment, Nathaniel wasn't there. Emma ran up to her, her pigtails bouncing, and hugged her tightly. Miss Clem, what cookies are we making today? She asked, eyes sparkling. Clementine knelt down, forcing a smile. I just came to talk today, sweetheart. I might not be teaching anymore. Emma's eyes widened in dismay. You're not coming back, but I like you the most, and Mr. Nate likes you too. Her voice wavered, and Clementine's heart clenched. I like you too, she whispered, holding the girl tightly. But I need to take a little break, okay? You'll still bake amazing cookies, I know you will. Emma nodded slowly, though her face was downcast. I'll make cookies for you, so you'll come back. She ran off to grab flour, determined to bake her way into keeping Clementine around. Clementine left the center with a heavy heart. Emma, with her gap-toothed smile, was one of the reasons she loved that class. Nathaniel, though she hated to admit it, was another. But Valerie's words had planted deep doubt in her heart. Back at the bakery, Clementine opened her laptop and stared at the unfinished draft of her Miss Oven Mitt blog. She wanted to write about the half-and-half cookie, but every word felt stuck. She thought about Nathaniel, his rare smile with Emma, the way he'd eaten her cookies, even though he didn't like sweets. Had she misunderstood him? But then Valerie's voice rang out again in her memory, and she quietly shut her laptop. Upstairs on the 12th floor, Nathaniel opened the box Clementine had sent. Inside lay the half-and-half cookie and the note, "Some things can't be whole if only one person is trying." His chest tightened. He didn't know exactly what Valerie had said to her, but he could guess. And his silence, his damn silence, had hurt her. He took a bite of the cookie. The bittersweet chocolate clashed gently with the tangy cheese, an oddly satisfying mix, yet undeniably divided, just like his feelings. Nathaniel wanted to call her, but apologies didn't come easily to him. He thought of the awkward smiles, the flour-dusted apron, the sparkle in her eyes when she taught. She had made him laugh. She had made him try cookies again. Now she was walking away, and he didn't know how to stop her. Clementine curled up with butter, gazing out her window. She thought of Emma, of the cookie she'd sent Nathaniel. This decision hurt, but she had to protect herself from deeper wounds. She didn't know if Nathaniel understood, or if he even cared. But in her chest, something ached like an empty pan cooling on a silent stove. On the 12th floor, Nathaniel stood in the kitchen, a space he rarely used. In front of him was a disaster. A misshapen, blackened cookie, the smell of burnt sugar clinging to the air like guilt. Gideon Vale had just called him and said, "Don't let silence ruin something worth holding on to." Nathaniel wasn't good with words, so he chose to speak the language Clementine loved most baking. The result was far worse than he'd hoped, but still, he carefully packed the charred cookie into a box, and with a deep breath, he made up his mind. He was going to see her. At 8 p.m., a knock echoed through Clementine's apartment. She opened the door and froze. There stood Nathaniel, no suit in sight, just a soft blue sweater and jeans, looking human, unsure. In his hands was a small box. "I made this," he said awkwardly, extending it toward her. "I didn't know how to start, so I figured I'd start with a burnt cookie." Clementine looked at the box, then up at him, eyes stinging. She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a jet-black, lopsided cookie. "You made this?" she asked, her voice trembling. She couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. Nathaniel nodded, and for once the guarded look in his eyes was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "I know baking is your language," he said, "and I tried. Clearly, I'm worse at it than you imagined." He paused, drawing in a breath. "Clementine, about last week, I don't agree with anything Valerie said, but I stayed silent, and that silence hurt you. I'm sorry." Clementine bit her lip and tears spilled over. She never imagined that Nathaniel Wolfe, the man who once wouldn't even try her scones, would be standing here with a burnt cookie in hand, apologizing. "You didn't need to bake anything," she whispered, voice catching, "but thank you." Nathaniel took a step closer, hesitating, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to quit," he said, voice low. "The class needs you. Emma needs you, and—" He hesitated again, this time longer. "I need you." Clementine let out a soft, tearful laugh and wiped her cheeks. "You're sweeter than your cookie," she teased, but her heart was racing. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Nathaniel, stiff at first, slowly embraced her back, holding her tighter than he realized. From the kitchen counter, Butter jumped down, padded over to the box, sniffed the cookie, took a bite, and immediately walked away with a look of disdain. They both burst out laughing. "Butter's not impressed," Clementine giggled. "She has good taste," Nathaniel replied, his eyes warm, focused only on her. In that tiny kitchen, surrounded by the scent of cocoa and burnt sugar, they stood there holding each other like two puzzle pieces that finally fit. Clementine knew that no matter how different their worlds were, this moment was perfect. The Wolf estate sat quietly on the snowy edge of the city, a stately home with red roof tiles and a garden lightly dusted with snow. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly. Christmas lights twinkled on a towering tree, and the scent of pine mingled with fresh-baked gingerbread. Clementine Harper stepped into the festive warmth, holding a tin of homemade butter cookies. She wore a simple red sweater, her hair loosely tied back, and stood beside Nathaniel Wolf, feeling like she had walked straight into a holiday painting. Nathaniel, in a dark blue sweater and tailored trousers, looked more relaxed than usual, though a hint of tension still lingered in his eyes as he led her inside. After the emotional hug in her kitchen the week before, Nathaniel had invited Clementine to spend Christmas with his family, specifically with his grandmother, Catherine Wolf, the woman he often spoke of with reverence. Clementine had agreed, her heart pounding with nerves. She wasn't sure if she belonged in his world, but when the front door opened, Catherine Wolf, with her silver hair pinned up in a warm smile, wrapped Clementine in an enthusiastic hug. "You're Clementine!" she exclaimed, her voice delighted. "I've been waiting to meet you since the moment you appeared in our video call." Blushing, Clementine offered the cookie tin. "I brought butter cookies. I wasn't sure if they were Christmassy enough, but—" "They're perfect, dear," Catherine beamed. "Come, we're baking the Wolf family gingerbread. Nathaniel, you too." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Grandmother, you know I can't bake," he said, but followed them anyway, his eyes lingering on Clementine with rare softness. The Wolf kitchen was spacious, with marble countertops and a vintage oven. Catherine pulled out a worn leather-bound recipe book, its pages yellowed with age. "This is the family secret," she said with a wink, "but I think you'll make it even better." Clementine smiled, the nerves fading. She rolled up her sleeves and began mixing the dough while Catherine guided her, slipping in stories of her youth between steps. Nathaniel was tasked with rolling the dough. He worked carefully, albeit clumsily, ending up with flour-coated hands. Clementine laughed. "Mr. Wolf, we're rolling dough, not negotiating million-dollar contracts," she teased. Nathaniel grunted, but the corners of his mouth lifted. "Easy for you to say," he muttered, deliberately rolling the dough unevenly just to make her laugh. Catherine watched them, her eyes twinkling with amusement as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. Together, they cut the cookies into stars, trees, and hearts, Clementine's idea, in honor of Emma. As the gingerbread baked, its warm scent filled the kitchen. Clementine and Nathaniel stood side by side, shoulders gently brushing. She told him about Sweet Haven, about Butter the cat, and the time she burned an entire tray of cookies as an apprentice. Nathaniel, usually reserved, admitted to once sneaking cookies as a child and getting caught. "Grandmother made me do dishes for a week," he said with a rare, fond smile. Catherine, piping icing onto the cookies, chimed in. "He was a little rascal back then. Now he's too serious. Thank goodness you came along, Clementine. He laughs more now." She gave Clementine a warm look. "Ever since I saw you on that video call, I knew you were the missing flavor in this family." Clementine's cheeks flushed. Her hands paused over the dough. "You're being too kind," she whispered, but her heart was beating fast. Beside her, Nathaniel said nothing, but the way he looked at her steady, gentle spoke volumes. Christmas dinner took place in a cozy dining room, the table filled with roast dishes, warm rolls, and fresh gingerbread. Clementine sat beside Nathaniel, feeling an unexpected sense of belonging. Catherine shared stories of old Wolf holidays, of Nathaniel's grandfather, of Christmases long past. Clementine, usually awkward at formal gatherings, found herself laughing and listening like she'd always been part of this family. When they raised their glasses for a toast, Catherine clinked hers gently with Clementine's. "Thank you for bringing new flavor to this table," she said, winking at Nathaniel. He shook his head, but under the table, his hand brushed Clementine's and stayed there, warm and firm. Later, the two of them cleaned up together in the kitchen. "My grandmother likes you," Nathaniel said, voice low. Clementine smiled, dimples deepening. "I like her too. And you. And gingerbread, of course." She tilted her head teasingly, but her eyes sparkled with something deeper. As they stepped out of the kitchen, the glow of Christmas lights reflected in their eyes. Nathaniel reached for her hand, gentle but sure. For the first time, Clementine didn't feel like just the girl who baked cookies. She felt like a part of his story, a story just beginning, written in flour and sugar and the sweetness of Christmas love. Miss Ovenmitt Bakery, tucked on a bustling street corner, glowed beneath the soft winter sun. Its wooden sign was carved with graceful lettering, and through the glass windows, golden croissants, butter cookies, and vibrant passion fruit tarts sat proudly on display. Clementine Harper, wearing a crisp white tee and a brand new apron, stood behind the counter, heart fluttering. Just a year ago, she was a behind-the-scenes pastry chef at Sweet Haven and an anonymous food blogger. Today, Miss Ovenmitt wasn't just her very own bakery, it was a name known across the globe, beloved for its easy, heartwarming recipes. It was opening day. The shop was alive with customers, congratulatory bouquets, and familiar faces. Clementine glanced toward the door just as Nathaniel Wolfe stepped inside, punctual as always. For the past year, he'd shown up every morning, buying exactly one pastry, usually a croissant, a nod to their serendipitous meeting at the Daily Brew. Today, he held a small bouquet of lavender, placing it gently on the counter with a soft smile. "Congratulations on the grand opening, Miss Harper," he said, his voice as warm as his coat. "One croissant, as usual." Clementine smiled, dimples deepening. "Mr. Wolfe, it's a special day. Take two." She pushed a warm croissant toward him, her eyes twinkling. Nathaniel accepted it but didn't leave. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, his expression suddenly more serious. Clementine, distracted by cleaning the counter, didn't notice the shift until the shop bell jingled and a group of children burst through the door. Leading them was Emma, now 8, her pigtails bouncing with excitement. "Miss Clem!" she squealed, wrapping her arms around her. "It's so pretty. I brought the whole class to celebrate." The children from the community baking class, now Clementine's regular students, gathered around, pointing excitedly at the cookie displays. Soon the shop filled with familiar laughter. Catherine Wolfe, Nathaniel's parents, Gideon Vale, and Clementine's family, her parents and older brother, all gathered to celebrate. Even Butter the cat, lounging lazily behind the counter, stretched, yawned, and surveyed the scene like a silent judge. In the bustle, Clementine barely noticed Nathaniel, signaling quietly to everyone. When she turned back around, he was standing in front of the counter again, now holding a small box. The bakery fell silent, save for the faint sound of Christmas music playing in the background. "Clementine," Nathaniel began, voice steady but deep enough to still her heart. "A year ago, I met you in a coffee shop. You were holding a croissant like it was treasure. I thought I needed 5 minutes to say no and walk away." He paused, locking eyes with her. "But you with flour on your cheek and that nervous smile made me stay. I've eaten enough of your pastries to know the one thing I want to keep is you." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, gleaming under the bakery lights. Clementine's hands flew to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. The crowd gasped and Emma jumped up and down, shouting, "I knew it, just like in cartoons." You mean it," Clementine whispered, voice shaking. Nathaniel smiled, a rare, radiant smile that melted her. "More than anything," he said, stepping closer, taking her hand. "Clementine Harper, will you marry me?" She nodded through her tears and threw her arms around him. Applause exploded through the bakery. Catherine wiped her eyes. Gideon nodded, proud. Clementine's parents beamed with joy. Emma wedged herself between them, hugging both. "I want to be the flower girl." Clementine laughed through her tears, turning to Nathaniel. "You know what? I want to keep you too," she said softly, then kissed his cheek. Nathaniel, cheeks flushed, pulled her into a full embrace as the crowd cheered. The bakery bustled on, but in the corner, Clementine and Nathaniel stood hand in hand, watching the scene together. Behind the counter, Butter the cat yawned again and curled up, seemingly satisfied with the ending. Clementine looked around the warmth, the people, the croissant that started it all, and knew, no matter how much the world changed, she'd found the one person she wanted to eat pastries with every single day.